Jesus, we fix our eyes on you, the author and perfecter of our story. Help us to know you more clearly, love you more dearly, and follow you more nearly, each and every day. Amen. Please sit down. From my prayer at the beginning, in the sentence in the collect, you've probably gathered, most of you have been around church a day or two, where we're headed. Today, what we call family has changed significantly in my lifetime. It comes in all shapes and sizes, and it often includes people who are loved even when they are not connected by DNA. That's not new. In that first century, they would have called it an oikos, a household, that larger gathering. And sure, it included the extended family, but included others that were dear as well. But today, when the past century or two, the definition of family has been that immediate nuclear family, this has become somewhat of a foreign concept, but the generations that follow you actually have no problem with it. They understand it because families have become estranged and distant, broken and geographically separated. Many of us understand that. And people have stood into those places. I think the challenge for the 21st century is that we will easily use that name, but it is not conditional, and we will add and discard, like tossing out my favorite t-shirt that functioned as pajamas that I've had for 12 or 13 years, but it literally was so threadbare, it was becoming very religious, very holy. And my wife came to me and said after doing the laundry, "This is the last time. We're not going to wash it anymore. Its time has come." And we do that with relationships too often. For this setting where Jesus is speaking, these words can be very radical because in ancient Israel, the word family, while there was the word oikos, particularly once the church reached the Greek world, but for people in the Galilee, family was defined by being the Hebrew people and ancestry and lineages, and that was their identity. They often lived in insula of extended families with the matriarch and patriarch and their kids and their kids and their kids, and there would be 60 to 80 people living in this insula. I think of that when I get home and I'm ready for the quiet and don't want the phone to ring anymore. I've lived in community with as many as 30 people, adults and children, and how we worked out ways to escape and have privacy, but we had a lot more physical space than they had in families of that day. While it seems it could be burdensome, there was a protection that if you became a widow or widower, or you became an orphan, there were people that still loved you and to whom you belonged and cared for you. As a young mother, you not just relied on mother and grandmother, but all of the aunts who would have been there to support you and help you sort this out, particularly when you became a mother at 13, 14 years old. There was the protection of employment because typically a family had a profession for that family. There wasn't any of this self-exploration of what wanted to be. Occasionally someone would, but generally your family did this and that's what you did. By announcing this new kind of family, Jesus is flying in the face of some fiercely held tradition for a Galilean Hebrew community. I don't think he's trying to snub his blood brothers and sisters and mother at all. I do think, from looking at it, he's saying something to the people of God in that it's no longer purely defined by bloodline, but defined by being those people together. that the DNA is actually this relationship centered and connected by Jesus, which is even bigger and stronger. You later see it when John is told by Jesus in the last minutes before he dies, John, your mother, your son. We see it with Naomi and Ruth when the children have died and the mother-in-law is going to go home and is releasing the daughter-in-law back to her people and her gods. And she says, no, you are my family, and goes with her. But today, with the geographical separation, the pandemic, the global economy, the instant communication, which makes it so simple, the increasing broken families relationally, that guarantee of an identity and a people to whom you belong is no longer unconditional. The separation of the pandemic has made it even harder. There was, when a parent was ill, the child could get on the plane and be there in 24 hours. Last year, during the first lockdown, I did a funeral that involved a family from Christchurch, but on the Zoom funeral, they were in Wellington, Auckland, Sydney, Melbourne, LA, New York, British Columbia, and the United Kingdom. Unable to be together, scattered. It's interesting that as God's people, how do we see ourselves? Are we limited to how the society defines us as a people and as a family, or do we see it the way Jesus says? And it's a challenge, it is. Church is hard. Being family as a church is hard. Or it could be a very beautiful anchor for the littlest kids in this building to the most senior mothers and fathers of this community. But that's what Christ calls us to be as family. He starts with terms like, you are my friends, and he ends with, you are my brothers and sisters. In his last meal, his last time, when they are celebrating for the first time this Passover communion, and he changes it and says, actually, that was a prototype of this, which is a prototype of what's about to happen. He spends what we have as 4 chapters in John talking about one thing: unity as a family. 4 chapters, all at the same place and the same time. The church is often not held that well. We, as the Anglican Communion, have not held that well. We, as the church in New Zealand or the Anglican Church, have not held that well. And yes, even in this parish, it has not always been held well. You see, as Anglicans, we are a communion, not a denomination. There's no membership papers to sign. This is our membership. We gather around this table with Jesus, not to light incense and hope some mysterious distant God loves us, but he defines our relationship with him around that table together. As Anglicans, we have a very narrow, clear, uncompromising identity around Jesus, and all of the other issues that divide are secondary, tertiary, quaternary, pendiary, and down. Sure, some of them are worth arguing over, but they're not worth failing to be one Catholic universal church. We know the words: one faith, one baptism, one God. But we fight, and even when it's not theological battles within our church, I will leave you and not be at morning tea because I need to go have a coffee and untangle some thread that's knotted probably 30 times by some good people who have failed to love one another and be unified and think the best of one another. Too often there's tribal camps and preferences. And yes, this church is more complex. You just have to look at our normal communion. with cups and in tinctures and chalices, in organs and guitars and drums, in children and Chinese and Solomon Islands and French and South African and Baptists and Anglicans and people of no heritage. But that's the very secret of what it was called for the Hebrew people to be the light of the world, to bring everyone together. And the secret of letters to the Galatians to be one people and not be separated by the little things. That word communion, it comes from two words, common union. Community, communion. And in this common unity, it doesn't mean uniform, but it means unified. It's one of a unity in a commitment as one people. Sociologically, a people group on the surface is defined by language, clothes, food, music. But at a deeper, there's a shared heart, commitment, purpose, identity, common story. And we have that common story. To be a people in a world that doesn't know communion or community. The church at its best shares the best of times and the worst. And one thing that's never at risk is whether you or I or anyone else will belong, will have a place, will have a voice, will be cared for even when they don't deserve it, even when they're difficult. Not that anybody in here would ever be difficult. We'll leave that and I'll keep moving for the sake of my life. But it's interesting that the fact that Jesus mentions mothers and sisters, he looks at this crowd, and as he looks at his family outside, that means everyone there was seated, including women of different generations, which in that culture unmistakably would have meant they were disciples learning and following Jesus, pushing cultural boundaries that were not included in that culture. Typically, women would have been Marthas, or Margarets, or Marians, or, we could go around the room. They wouldn't be sitting here. But Jesus pushed those boundaries. So a question, are we aware of cultural boundaries that we accept as right because we're in New Zealand and this is our culture and therefore it's right and we just accept it? Are there cultural boundaries we need to challenge and push back on and let go of our angst and emotion on? When we left Wellington and went to New Orleans, we were struggling. God, what are you saying for us to do? You've told us to come, we've come, but we're not sure how in this very PTSD broken city. We felt that we were called to a people who were beyond the reach of ordinary churches like ours here. And we felt that we were called to be a people in and amongst. And what does that even mean and look like? Because we so often define being the family of God in the church as programs rather than who we are in and amongst and with Him. We use the name communitas from the Latin. It means community. But it has a sense of a people that are forged by a shared journey and purpose, which often means they strive together and sacrifice together. Military units, drama troops, sport teams, symphonies. A people who strive and go together. Be it book fairs or parish fairs, be it lessons and carols or shared lunches, we're to be one unified people. But it goes deeper because Jesus calls us family, sisters and brothers. Look, in my role, too much of my time is consumed with divisiveness. People not thinking the best of each other. Gossiping, spreading it, making judgments, operating on quarter truths or fifth of truth, much less whole truth. And then statements come back to me via carrier pigeons. What's going on in this church? Well, you haven't asked. You don't want to be at the table and help be a part of what we're doing, but over here in the corner you have an opinion. And you're judging this person who's actually at the table and leaning in. There was a day that many of us will remember when we called that sin. Gossip, divisiveness, bitterness, failing to be sisters and brothers together. Families in their best when they're together. Listen to Granddad's story one more time that you've heard 40 times. Listening to the children natter on about something you have no idea what they're talking about, but you smile and laugh and lean in and tell them how great it is. Listening to the brother-in-law who's only been in the family for a short time and doesn't quite understand yet. Eating the meal item, part of the meal that so-and-so brought that you actually have no liking for, but you eat it and tell them how wonderful they are. Why? Because you're family. How many times I've eaten vegetables that have had the life cooked out of them and told my great aunt how great it was. I think the thing for us, for you, starting with me, probably everybody in the room save Josiah, is that we are the aunts and the uncles, the grandmoms and granddads, the mothers and the fathers, who actually determine the culture that we will be as a church. Because you walk with that great Maori word, which would take a paragraph to translate, but we all get, you walk with mana. An earned presence and right to speak and determine what the culture will be. But the culture that we practice or the culture that we tolerate will be the culture. And if we tolerate that divisive, angry bitterness, then that will be our culture and that's what we'll be known for. There's still people who have not been to a shared Sunday worship and lunch since I've been here. That number's decreasing and that's great. But there's still people who won't go because of that music. But they're not even there to even know the music. But one of 2 or 3 people who determine that music, 2 of them are in this room right now. One is young, one is more senior. Shape and determine that based on where we're going as a church together. And I'll let you in on a secret. That other congregation that doesn't bring enough savories, so my congregation should be on savories. Here's the secret. Because I see the invoices and review our spending. An equal number of little pies and frozen mini sausage rolls are bought for both of those services to make sure we have enough. An equal number of New World slices are brought and sliced, no matter who's on desserts. And you know what? It doesn't matter, does it? Those aren't the best pies and sausages. I don't really enjoy them. I'll just be quite honest. But it's the family. We're together. And we laugh and talk and get to know each other. And we're one people. So I want to encourage you, the senior congregation of this church, to remind those who forget and go into, and you don't have to be ugly, but you can just remind them, we're family. That's your daughter. That's your granddaughter. We're one. Because even blood families don't stick like they used to. And they're scattered. And the more and more broken our society comes, the brighter and brighter and the more vital that the people of God live that out. And just by how you live, you will bring hope and joy and healing to lives. Because that's who Jesus is calling us to be. Now, I natter on in my sermons. I see the eyes start to get heavy. You endure me anyway. Some of you still love me. I don't want you to just hear these words and then go out tomorrow and you're having that cup of tea with someone and slip back in and forget what was said today. Because it's the little pragmatic actions and conversations that happen tomorrow or Saturday or Sunday around the corner at Monteith's that actually determine the culture. And as your priest, I'm delivering, as you know how you have a real estate agent represent the owner, a priest's role is to be the agent and speak in that place with great trepidation. God calls us to be family. He calls us to be unified, and he calls us to have great grace with one another. If you were to come to my home today, and for the past 20-something years, in the loo that is used by any guest, you would find an over 200-year-old slate roof tile, nail holes in it, but painted on it, hanging on the wall in the loo, hanging on it is this cute little saying. I bet you have a bathroom with cute little sayings too. A friend is one who sees through the act and still enjoys the show. Think of your best friend. You just look past the foibles. They get off on that tangent all the time. You love them anyway, because they love you when you do it. A church is a family of different backgrounds and different passports. Who cares the color of a passport? It allows you to get on an airplane. You're subjects of the King. The King. We're one family together, sent to a world that doesn't know him. You're grafted in, and Paul told the Galatians, you are now daughters and sons of Abraham as well. We're called to be one people, and we're called to live out those values of that table, that altar, that sacrifice, that resurrection that we quoted in the Creed. Let us pray. Jesus, we fix our eyes on you, the author and perfecter of our story. Our story is family, and as your family, your church, help us to know you more clearly, love you more dearly, and follow you more nearly each and every day.